This podcast is part of the Batman Universe Podcast Network, hosted by the BatmanUniverse.net. Check out everything related to Batman and the entire Bat family at the BatmanUniverse.net, including news and original content related to comics, movies, television, merchandise, video games, and more. Also, check out some of the other unique podcasts that TBU has to offer. Consider supporting this podcast by becoming a patron on Patreon. Even $1 can go a long way in supporting this content that you enjoy. Look for a link over at thebatmanuniverse.net to offer your support now. And now, on with the show.
In 2008, a podcast was created with one goal: to bring Bat fans around the world news related to movies, comics, video games, television, merchandise, and so much more. And now, the Batman Universe Podcast has returned.
Hello everyone and welcome to the latest episode of the TBU Podcast. I am Dustin, and today Scott brings us a very special interview with current writer of Detective Comics, Ram V. Ram V has also been known for writing a variety of other Batman universe comics, including Catwoman. He previously worked on Justice League Dark back when we were covering it years ago. There's been a number of different things that he's done, but specifically we're going to be focusing a lot more on his current work, which is Batman Detective Comics and his current story, Gotham Nocturne. So sit back and let's throw it over to Scott.
This is Scott with the Batman Universe Podcast, and today I have a very special guest joining me. Comic book fans may know him as the writer of These Savage Shores, Venom, Carnage, Justice League Dark, Catwoman, Swamp Thing, and Detective Comics, among many other titles. Launching in May, he'll have a new book at DC Comics, The Vigil. I'm so happy to welcome the exceptional Ram V to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me. It's an absolute pleasure to get to talk to you.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Since the name of the podcast is the Batman Universe, we're going to start right off with Detective Comics. We've been reading it. It's, your run is beautiful, haunting, dark, emotional, and heavy with symbolisms and themes. It's a really nice horror macabre kind of vibe that, just feels fantastic. First question, I have is what, inspired you to tell this kind of story for Batman?
Yeah, usually when I want to come up on a project, when I want to pitch a project, I ask myself, what can I do that's new? What can I do that feels a little bit original, that hasn't been done before? And I'll be very honest, I didn't think this vibe, this aesthetic would be something that hadn't been done on Batman before. But turns out a gothic, operatic, kind of modern day Batman, but entwined with historical lore and the idea of old things lying under the city in wait, hadn't really been done before. And if anything, I would have hated to got onto a book and done something that felt like it was, part of the same sort of milieu of books that had been there before. So, I came to Detective with this take. When I talked to my editors, I said, I kind of want to take on a big book next, something like Detective, perhaps. And so one of my editors said, okay, what would you do if you were taking on Detective? I said, I would do overly dramatic, operatic Batman where everyone wore flowing gowns and capes and stood in the dark of night at their windows and brooded about their existential dread. So yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, it definitely, that feeling comes across, and it's I think it's weird to say this because of the operatic vibe and everything, but it's refreshing, I feel like, in a way too. That's just to have that. It's so drenched in that vibe. So I know I personally love it. On the comic side of our podcast, we have a separate one that just reviews comics. I know they're enjoying it.
Right, great.
the question I have on the story, there's a lot going on in the story between the past, present, the Orghams and Batman, and one thing that seems present in everything, and this goes from the transformations with the Asthma to discussions about Batman's dual identity, is this idea of, duality, this battle. And it's, no more present than in characters like Two-Face, who's very prominent in the story. So the question I had is, how do you view this duality, and like, how does it bleed into the story for you?
I mean, the duality of it is really at the heart of the narrative. It's an easy sort of question to ask of Batman. Like, okay, who is the driving force? Is it Bruce or is it Batman? And I kind of wanted to take that into a more sort of metaphysical level, where what is the difference between Bruce and Batman? Outside of the functional stuff of, I wear the costume, I go out at night and I fight crime. How are the two inner personalities different? And that's where this idea of one desiring to be a human and the other pulling towards being something more, we want to say demonic, but I don't really, I think more mythical, is the idea. And then obviously that thought process then took me to Barbatos, and I said, okay, what if Barbatos is the embodiment of the mythical idea of Batman, which he kind of is. And then obviously once I had that, it was a matter of finding things within the narrative that would reflect that idea. Gotham itself suffers from such a duality, right? The idea of whether it is a good city with problems or it is an evil city with good people in it. When you say you're saving Gotham, or Batman's always saving Gotham, what is he saving? Is he saving the city, its institutions, its structures, or is he saving its people? And if he is saving its people, are we allowed to make this judgment of, no, only the good people get saved and then the bad people don't get saved? Who makes that judgment? And I think these are all interesting questions within that sort of microcosm of the Batman Gotham universe, if you will. And then obviously the moment my brain went there, Two-Face was the obvious sort of metaphor there. Can you really save Harvey? If you think excising Two-Face from that, or Scarvy from that equation, is the way to save Harvey, have you really saved him, or have you only saved half a person, and so that kind of question is interesting, exciting, and for now we have dealt with it, and we will see the ramifications of what has happened so far.
Cool. Yeah, you actually, like, my next question was, more about Two-Face too, because that's, with him being so central to the heart of, at least what we've read so far, it's for one, I wanted to say too that, like, this is, as far as a fan of the character, this is probably one of the best Two-Face stories we've seen in a long time, personal opinion. And then, the fact that this kind of is reflected in him, everything going on in Gotham is reflected in him. I wanted to ask, is this, is he in a way representative of, like, the centuries old battle that's been going on between Batman and the Orghams, through the past stories? Is there some kind of current there, or is he just kind of its own thing?
I mean, he's the most obvious metaphor to take to explore that. But I mean, all the other villains I've picked on through the run are also kind of bearing their own duality, if you will. Freeze of is he a good person trying to save his wife, or is he a terrible monster sacrificing other people for his obsession? You take Talia. Is she a good person born into a difficult ideology, or is she simply carrying on her father's work? And so I think that idea of dualities, people kind of caught between two things, is a common thread to all the characters that I've picked so far, with maybe the exception of Ten-Eyed Man and Solomon Grundy. I picked them because they were just cool.
Well, 10 Man really fits the aesthetic and everything, of Gotham.
Yeah. I mean, maybe he's caught between 10 ideas. Who knows? But yeah, no. So Two-Face is like the most obvious expression of that, but I think it is true of all of the characters that we've picked on so far, and I think we will see that duality, that struggle play out, and what role all of these characters have in the climax, in the coming together of the narrative.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's not. Although it has been centered around Two-Face for quite a while, it's not really a story that's limited to Two-Face. If you see what I mean.
Yeah, no, I see what you mean.
It's just a personal connection because he happens to be Bruce's friend, and so it made sense to be able to place Harvey and Scarvy on one side, and then Bruce Wayne and Barbatos on the other.
No, that makes sense, and it's just what you mentioned earlier too with removing the, as you call it, Scarvy from Harvey. Does that really save him? It's a nice representation to see, because there are a lot of stories where like the goal is to excise that from Two-Face, the Two-Face part, and leave the Harvey. And in this case, it's like a bond. There's like a union and like a balance kind of going. Or at least an attempt at it.
Extrapolate that idea further, it kind of leads into a lot of problems that we face with contemporary society and the way it looks at mental health, the way it looks at criminality. I mean, this city has a lot of crime. So what do? Okay, we'll catch all the criminals and put them in prison. Does that solve it? Have you saved the city?
Yeah.
If you haven't addressed the reason criminality exists in the first place, if you haven't, to go back to more metaphysical ways of speaking, if you haven't fixed the soul of a city and you keep picking on its scabs, how are you really saving that city? And so this is the question Batman must ask of himself. If I've been spending all this time, fighting off these people that I think of as villains, and then there's another force that comes in and says, great, I can wave a magic wand, then all these villains are gone. Mm-hmm. Is Gotham a better place now? Have you saved it?
Right. It's interesting talking about the soul aspect of it, or using that term, because one of the beats that was in the most recent issue that came out, Detective Comics 1069, there was a conversation between Jim Gordon and Batman, after patching Batman up. And, it's leaned into this idea of, the Bruce Wayne side, the human side, feeding the mythical Batman, as you were saying, and giving up pieces of himself and possibly his soul. It seemed like was some of the undercurrent there to keep Batman going.
Yeah. And this is true, again, this is true of people in non-superhero narratives as well, right? You build this expectation around you, you build this mythology. And when you are young and you have that sort of fire and energy to put into it, the mythology feeds on that and thrives and does well. But then there comes a time where you lose that energy, you don't have it anymore. But the mythology still needs to be fed. Otherwise, it will collapse. And so we see so many people, kind of really driven people, kind of running themselves into the ground because everyone else must not see them bleed. Everyone else must still see the Dark Knight flying across the sky. And so rather than say whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, because I think that's less interesting question. Yeah. And the more interesting question is that true of Bruce Wayne? Is that true of Batman? And if so, what's he going to do? Is he going to step back? Is he going to step into it? What's the solution? And we'll see the narrative play out.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm sure he'll tell us, just not now, because we're only getting to chapter 2, end of the month. So when it comes to, the Orghams, and kind of the cyclical battle here going on here, this what feels almost like a loop, with what we saw in the annual, One of the co-hosts on our comic podcast, Ian, there's a shout out for Ian, had a question about this, and he asked, do you see the patterns of history, as represented by the reality engine, and can the Orghams' plans be broken or only resisted?
Sorry, what was the question again?
So, do you see the patterns of history as represented by the reality engine in the issue? And the follow-up to that was, can the Orghams' plans be broken or only resisted?
Well, I mean, part of the problem is the reality engine. If you read the annual, the reality engine that they placed into Gotham was not planted in the most optimal circumstances. They had a sort of a spanner in the works in the form of a proto Batman thrown in, if you will. And so I would say that whatever reality that the Orghams desired has been running in a loop, but is constantly thwarted by the presence of these kind of mythical characters. And a lot of people came back and said, does that mean Batman has always existed, that Gotham will always create a Batman? I think that's the less interesting question. The more interesting question is is that why the city keeps creating vigilantes? Is that why the city keeps creating? So it's not just Batman.
Yeah.
Is that why there are so many Bat people existing in Gotham? Is that why? Because that's a really odd thing for a city to have, constantly generate Robins and Nightwings and Signals and Batgirls and Batwomen. I thought it was a fascinating concept. And if you go look back at Morrison's run, the hypothesis Morrison makes is that Batman is part of the design of Gotham, right? Now, there's two ways you could look at that. When the obvious assumption is, yes, he is part of the design of Gotham, and therefore he is one of the pieces that fit into Gotham. Or you could think that the design has an error, and the error that repeats itself each time is Batman. And so this run hypothesizes that the Orghams had a design, and there was an error in that design, and the error has kept replicating itself. And now they're finally back to remove that error from their design, if you will. Because I think philosophically, that says something different. It says that Batman, and therefore a vigilante, is not and can never be part of the system, right? If you make your vigilantes part of the system, then essentially they're just another tool for the system, for the institution to oppress. But a true vigilante must always exist outside of the system and must always stand in opposition. And so I think that's a fascinating line for me to take. What happens to Batman if Gotham is fixed? Is that it? Does he fold away his cape, put it into a box, lock it up, and go home and live the good life? Or is his design, is his concept necessarily one that must find the next thing to fix?
It's an interesting question.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about that. Yeah, that's an interesting question to ponder. I don't know if I can answer it. It's the one thing I was going to say, not necessarily related, but with the Orghams, is they need to learn from the tech community, and I don't think they're going to solve the problem by trying to excise it, because usually when you fix one thing, you break something else.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that leads to questions of what are your priorities? What are you willing to break to and what are you willing to keep? And those priorities change depending on who you are, what part of the city you come from, whether you're someone who lives in the penthouse or someone who rents in the roughest part of the city. And those answers are different. And so we must, I guess, from my perspective, I would like to see a Batman that truly sides with the little guy, that truly sides with people who really do need saving in the city, right? So we'll get to that in time. Yeah.
Okay. Good tease there. Jumping to the villain cameos we've had so far, do you have any more rogues planned to appear, like classic rogues? And are there any teases you could offer?
Oh yeah, there's definitely classic rogues planned to appear. I mean, 1072, 1071, 1072 kind of deals with the history of the Orghams and how that ties into Ra's al Ghul. And so I don't think we've had a Ra's appearance yet, so that will be there. We've got another big villain appearance coming up in 1071 as well, which I will not spoil, but people should watch out for it. And then the future arcs, I think there are 2-3 more arcs after that. And each of these arcs will feature, again, sort of big, interesting villains, but largely, I believe there's an arc with Catwoman making an appearance again. There's a very Morrison-inspired arc, so we'll see some Morrison-related bad guys show up as well. So, yeah, awesome. Lots of plans.
And you say lots of plans. How far out would you say, there are plans for in terms of the Detective Comics run?
I mean, I know the whole run. I know how it plays out. And I would say we're about halfway through.
Okay.
Getting close to halfway through. So
awesome. Well, that's exciting because, for us who have been enjoying it so far, that's ride this ride for as long as it goes. So
I'm glad. Usually structurally stories kind of build up to the halfway point.
Yeah. And
then everything goes crazy. So I hope people are prepared because things are about to go crazy.
But as far as we know, we just talked about the Rogues. What about members of the Bat family? Can we expect to see more of the roster join the fight?
To an extent.
Nightwing or Stephanie Brown?
To an extent. I won't confirm any of those names, but yes, we will see Bat family members make an appearance. I mean, Cass Kane already has made an appearance. Oracle's already been involved. So more to come. The story only expands and gets bigger from here. So
cool. And going back to what we were talking about earlier, something that I really enjoy about this run, is that it seems like, everything going on is, reflected and mirrored throughout Gotham City, like the city as itself. And, in a way, it does remind me, of, your work on Swamp Thing in the sense that, like, there's a strong connection between, our actions and, maybe the world or the planet around us, or in Detective Comics' case, the city. Can you speak more to this? Like, what inspires you to draw these connections?
I mean, I guess psychogeography has always been part of the way I've dealt with stories. I think stories are played out against a canvas, against a set. And if your set is extraneous to the story, then it kind of feels out of place. So the set becomes a character. The set needs to be a character in some ways. And so that has always been an endeavor, across my work. Paradiso, The Savage Shores, they were all sort of preoccupied with the histories and the personalities and the eccentricities of their own settings as well. So, and I mean, Gotham's role as a character within the Batman mythos is already laid into the foundations of any Batman story. So why not lean into it?
And then, jumping onto Swamp Thing, I wanted to talk about two things: Trinity and the Parliament of Gears. In that they're both fantastic additions to the lore. And really speak to different fears about humankind's destruction of nature. Climate change, and obviously this seemed intentional. And Trinity's inspiration seems pretty obvious, but are there any specific inspirations you had for the Parliament of Gears?
I mean, I wouldn't say it was an inspiration. I think if you kind of posit the basis of my Swamp Thing run as this grand narrative of ideas sort of colliding, coming together, pushing against each other, then it kind of made sense to me that if you look at the great parliaments established in the Swamp Thing mythos. These are things that govern the forces of life, the forces of the planet, and they have the ability to affect change onto the planet. And so then it made sense that, well, if you go back and look at the past, I don't know, 30, 40 years, the force that has affected the most amount of change on the planet is human industry. And so it tickled my fancy to go, okay, what if human industry then said, well, clearly we need a parliament and we should set one up? Because that's exactly how industry would do it. They would insinuate themselves into a place where they were not wanted. And then as soon as they were there, they were like, well, we should build ourselves an office. So yeah, that was kind of my thought process behind introducing that parliament. I know there had been other parliaments before that were looking at, industry and technology as a thing, but I felt like they hadn't truly investigated the idea of what does it mean when you say technology or industry is now an entity that is separate from its creators, that needs its own parliament. Because if you look at where the world is today, that's what we're doing, right? We say, oh, corporations are putting growth hormone into cows, and that's leading to human defects and problems. It's not corporations, it's people. But we insinuate the presence of this faceless entity called the corporation that must absorb all our negativity, because God forbid we blame CEOs and scientists sitting at the top of these things. When you do that, you are essentially creating an entity that is meant to take all responsibility. The same thing we do when we say AI art, for example, and we say, oh, AI art is learning. It's not plagiarism. It's learning, just like people do when they look at great painters and they learn from, yes, but AI is also just a tool created by people.
Yeah.
So it's not really, you can't really compare AI learning to people learning, because, AIs don't have children. They don't have to go home and feed their children and be gainfully employed, so that they can rent a house. So the idea that these pieces of technology or these ideas can exist untethered from their connection to humanity is a very dangerous idea. That we've opened the gates to, but have not necessarily explored.
No, and that's fascinating, and I love that thought process of it, because as you're talking, the gears of my brain are turning on that, and just, I know South Park made a joke about it too, but like the economy, we always talk about the economy like exactly. It's some deity, or with AI, there's always the argument that can be made of like what is true AI, because at the end of the day, it's programmed by people and serves a specific function and follows specific. I
mean, even if you do achieve true AI and it develops its own intelligence, you cannot possibly bequeath it the rights of a human being, because then you would say that in a society that I have created, I now bequeath the rights equal to me to something else. Which is a very, philosophically, if you think about it, it would be akin to God saying there's no difference between me and human beings, right? Like if you are so inclined to be theological in this regard, can you imagine a place where God creates human beings and then goes, you have the same rights and powers that I do?
Yeah, that would be
instantly that system breaks down.
That sounds like a comic book idea right there.
Yeah.
Still on Swamp Thing, are there any future plans for more Swamp Thing? Or
not tangibly so, but I've been very lucky and blessed to continue to do work at DC. So I don't imagine it's out of the realm of possibility for me to go, hey, can I return to this character? I've got another story to tell. I've got another idea to explore.
Okay. And then, you've written quite a lot of characters, big characters, for both of the big two. Are there any legacy characters you would like to write?
So my answer to this question is always yes, but I can't tell you about them because they're already pitches and they're probably sitting in editors' inboxes. So I would be undercutting myself.
No worries. I will pull back on that, but that's good to know because if whatever the character, I'm sure if your name's on there, and I would be interested to see what your take would be on that character. So
yeah, thank you. No, I mean it's really the great joy of working at these companies and being able to, reach out to editors and say, hey, what about this? I've got an idea. I kind of want to take this. Sometimes you get a response that's like, sometimes I particularly enjoy reinventions. So I like to pick up characters that haven't been seen for a while. And sometimes the response I'll get is like, really? Who? You want to do a story about that character that's not been around for 40 years? That's going to be great for sales. But I think it's part of the joy of it. And so I imagine that will be my endeavor to always be talking about characters that haven't been seen in a while, that I feel like we could do something interesting and new with.
Well, and I think there's something to be said of that. I think you could create little like mini renaissances of, love for that character, but also kind of open a whole new door for, other people to kind of like discover and glom onto it and, fall in love with either what makes that character great or, whatever that story's about, that's, as someone who really likes Swamp Thing, when you came out with your Swamp Thing series, I was like, oh, wow, like this is, he's back, I know he was in Justice League Dark and everything, but he's on his solo title. So it was great.
No, I agree that, there's always a window to do that. And look at everything Tom King has done, right? Like Human Target and Danger Street now and Rorschach. I think there's always interesting takes on characters that should be encouraged, and we should see them out in the world more often.
True. Speaking of new characters, what can you tell us about the Vigil coming out in May? Or I know they're appearing in Detective Comics first, but
yeah. No, so to put it succinctly, the Vigil is a group of independent operators whose sort of prime prerogative is to find and shut down rogue technology, rogue ideas, to prevent a future that we are not yet ready for, if you will. So with that sort of log line said, essentially it's a group of Indian superheroes that I'm introducing into the DCU as part of a team book. They to go into some exclusive reveals, they're kind of created by rogue technology. They're kind of created by the weaponization of dangerous ideas, and in their own creation, they realize there must be no more, and therefore they set out to become this kind of balancing force against the proliferation of these dangerous ideas. To go back to kind of the subject of AI and Parliament of Gears, like that's the kind of stuff they would be looking to stop. And so it puts these characters in an interesting territory, again, with this idea of like most rogue technology that we know of is usually starts off as a conspiracy, some sort of leak somewhere, someone's testing something, and it kind of takes me back to a subject that I'm fascinated with, stuff like the Philadelphia experiment and MK Ultra and there's shades of Roadside Picnic and Stalker in there. So again, like really, really good, meaty story stuff to dig into. And then in terms of format, planetary, global frequency, a lot of the Wildstorm stuff, Authority has always kind of dealt with this kind of stuff. But I think to do it again in the here and now, and to do it from the perspective of Indian characters with their cultural background, I think provides me with an interesting starting point, and therefore a fresh canvas.
Absolutely. Awesome. We'll look forward to that. And for anyone who's listening and their introduction to your work is Detective Comics,
Yeah.
what would you recommend them read next?
Well, go back and read Swamp Thing. Go back and read Justice League Dark. Obviously, pick up the Vigil when it comes out.
Mm-hmm.
But also, I'm a big fan of looking forward. So I've got lots of books coming out this year. So yeah, just keep an eye out for. If you enjoy my work, you will enjoy, everything that's about to come out. I've got a creator-owned with Dark Horse. I've got a creator-owned with Image. Many Deaths of Laila Starr, the hardcover is out now. And so that's another book that people have really enjoyed. So yes, don't limit yourself. Pick up anything and everything that tickles your fancy.
And then the last question I have, I like to ask, creators of, it's a two-parter. So, well, actually, it's the same question, but rewritten a different way.
Mm-hmm.
What are some comics on the shelves right now that inspire you? And the other way I phrase that is, what's on Ram V's pull list?
Well, I don't really do like monthly pulls, but I will pick up collected editions, trades, and I tend to follow creators a lot. So I'll pick up anything from Kieran Gillen. Generally pick up everything Jonathan Hickman does. Jed McKay, a lot of their stuff at Marvel has been really cool. Dan Waters, Azrael, Arkham City, now on Loki. Alex Packnadel is doing Red Goblin over at Marvel, but also has a creator-owned called All Against All Out. Dennis Campbell, who did 20th Century Men recently, is a phenomenal writer that people should be paying attention to. I think that's a fairly good slate of comics to be picking up and reading. Maxwell Prince, another one, Ice Cream Man, fantastic stuff. So yeah,
it's a pretty big stack there and very varied. Yeah. So, but yeah, thank you for joining me for the Batman Universe podcast. It's been a pleasure to have you on and talk to you.
Hopefully you guys enjoyed that interview with Ram V. We appreciate Ram V coming on to participate in the interview. Also, special thanks to Scott, who organized and obviously did the interview. And hopefully you guys are enjoying these different interviews that we have. If you have somebody that you'd like us to interview in the future, please be sure to send us an email at tbu@thebatmanuniverse.net with any suggestions of things you'd like to see on future episodes. In addition to that, if you're interested in finding out all about Batman and the entire Batman universe, be sure to check out our website, thebatmanuniverse.net, for all kinds of news, editorials, reviews, original content, other podcasts, all related to Batman and the Bat fandom, covering everything from movies, television, video games, comics, merchandise, and everything else that you can imagine. Outside of that, be sure to check us out on social media. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We are also on Discord. You can find all of our social links at the top of the page over at thebatmanuniverse.net. With all of that being said, thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Batman Universe podcast. See you guys next time.